square bracket syntax, which is how you access values in an array. We're going to talk about somewhat of an advanced topic called multidimensional arrays, and then as usual we're going to have a talk about coding conventions as they relate to arrays. So what is an array? Well, array is one of the 8 predefined data types in PHP, and it's known as a composite data type. And what that means is it's a data type that can hold multiple data values at the same time. This is opposed to scalar data types, and we've already learned about 3 of those: integer, float, and string. And an integer, a float, and a string data type can only refer to one piece of data. So an integer can refer to one number, float can refer to one floating point, a string can refer to one string. Array, on the other hand, can be used to hold multiple numbers or integers, multiple floats, and multiple strings. And actually, it can an array can hold any valid PHP type. It can hold as a data value. So you actually can have an array that contains both integers, floats, strings, and in fact, because an array is a valid PHP data type, it can actually hold an array as well, which will be known as a multi-dimensional array. And in PHP, arrays are treated as essentially maps. Because an array represents multiple pieces of data, you have to have a way to access those individual pieces of data. And so what it does is it creates a key, a set of keys, and it associates different values with each key. So like if you have an array with multiple numbers in it, let's say the temperature of the month, you need a way to access each of those temperatures, and the way you do that is using a key. In PHP, you can have 2 kinds of keys. They can be either integers or strings, and the values, as mentioned, can be any data type, as mentioned. Values can be repeated, but the keys must be unique, because if you had a key that 2 keys, how would you know which piece of data it refers to? So essentially, let's say we create an array here. We're going to call it, make this a little easier to read, call it ARR. So we're going to define a variable that's an array data type, and maybe we want it to hold 5 different numbers. So let's say it holds 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now the way that you access these different numbers, as mentioned, is through the use of a key. So we're going to associate a key with each of these different values. So for example, in what's known as a numerically indexed array, the number 0 is going to be used to refer to the first piece of data in the array, in this case the number 1. The number 1 will refer to the second piece, and so forth. The other option is that these keys could also be strings, and that's known as an associative array, which we're going to talk about now. So arrays with integer keys, as we just showed, are known as numerically indexed, or just simply indexed arrays. And arrays with string keys are known as associative arrays. So we have associative arrays and indexed arrays. So we had just looked at an example of an indexed array where you have, let's use some different numbers, where you have a key associated with them of 0, 1, and 2. And the reason I use 0 is that index arrays always begin with the index 0. So if you define a indexed array, the way you access the first element or piece of data that you've added to that array is using the key 0. And we're going to learn about the syntax in a second about how to do that. The other option would be that you could define an associative array. And let's say we have the same data values. Except that now we're going to use keys that are strings. Actually, let's make this 50. So now in order to access this first piece of data, 36, let's say these were temperatures during particular days of a week, we would access this using the key day 1. So the string day 1 refers to the piece of data 36, day 2 refers to 72, and day 3 would refer to 50. And this is opposed to using the numbers 0, 1, and 2. And so associative arrays are quite useful because they're a little more intuitive in your code, and when you access elements, you sort of get to use a description as to what piece of data you're getting from the array. Here we know that we're getting, like, for example, the temperature of day 1. Up here, we use 0 to index the array to access a value in the array. 0 doesn't have as much meaning because every indexed array has a 0 in it. So one thing to also note is that in PHP, arrays can be a mixture of indexed arrays and associative arrays, meaning that they can have numeric indexes and string indexes all in the same array. It's a little more complicated. They're not used quite as often, and so we're not going to discuss them here, but in the quick notes we've added a link to additional resources, an additional resources link that goes to the PHP manual webpage for arrays that's going to discuss a little more about using sort of this mixed type of array if you're interested in that. So how do we define an array? Well, in PHP, it's defined using what's known as the array construct, which is the word array and then a pair of parentheses. For indexed arrays, an array declaration is going to look like this. You have the variable name, you have the construct array with its 2 parentheses, and then you have a comma delimited list of values in the array. So here you have 95, the number 95, the floating point value 98.6, and the string hello. Now, because this is an index array, it uses integers as its keys. So this, because indexed arrays in PHP begin with the index of 0, this is going to be referenced with the key 1. 0. This is going to be referenced with the key 1, and this is going to be referenced with the key 2. Now, to define associative arrays, we use a similar syntax. We have the variable name, we have the array construct with the parentheses, and we have, again, a comma delimited list of values, but instead of just values, they're actually key value pairs. So we have the same data, 95, 98.6, and hello, or excuse me, the same values, and instead of using the default numeric keys that get associated with it, we're actually naming the key we want to associate with each piece of data. So for example, we're using the word, the string grade to refer to 95. Maybe that represents a grade on a test. We're going to use the string temp to refer to the temp 98.6. And maybe we have a string that's going to be a greeting, and so we'd reference that with greeting. And it's important to note that the commas in these lists are very important because it lets PHP know when you've finished defining one key value pair in an array versus another.